case study you're working on. So hopefully this will help you with some of the things in the case study. So internal pricing influences. We talked about at the end of the last lecture, we talked about external pricing influences. So what are the things that influence pricing strategy internally? Well, we talked about costs. And obviously costs are very, very important on internal pricing because we're trying to sell things for more than they cost and generate profit. So obviously the internal costs, and what we'll talk about break-even analysis in a second, or what our profit objectives are. Those are very, very important. We can't sell things for less than they cost for very long anyway. We can for some period of time. We may choose to do so from a strategic standpoint, but that's not a survivable strategy long term. Next thing we need to look at is the targeting and positioning strategy that we've come up with for our product. Who are we targeting and how are we going to position the product has a lot to do with how we set price, what the strategy is for the actual product itself, and maybe some other marketing objectives, which might be social objectives or market share objectives, all sorts of different kinds of objectives that might affect our pricing decisions. First, let's talk about costs and break-even. Costs establish the floor of the pricing range. We can't sell things for less than they cost for very long. So that really sets the low part of the pricing range. We talked about consumers and competitors setting the upper ceiling of what we can sell things for, and costs generally establish the floor. In order to understand costs, you need to understand how costs work. And we use break-even point to determine how much we have to sell in order to cover our costs at a given price level. And that's a fairly easy thing to calculate for existing products, because we know what our costs are and we know what they will presumably be in the near future. For new products, it's a lot harder. We have to estimate costs because we've never offered this product before, so we don't know our manufacturing costs, we don't necessarily know our distribution costs, we don't know all sorts of things. So we usually employ industrial engineers to come up with a forecast of costs based on similar products that we've made in the past, or how other people in the industry produce products and how those are costed. So those of you who've had the accounting course in the graduate program, or who have had accounting courses or managerial accounting courses in other educational environments, this may be a review. For those of you who haven't had these things, this may be somewhat new information, but I think it's pretty logical. It's really important to understand the difference between total costs, fixed costs, and variable costs, because they have a huge amount to do with break-even points and setting prices. So total cost is the total of fixed plus variable costs. So that's the total cost of any good, is all of the fixed costs plus all of the variable costs. Fixed costs are overhead expenses such as rent and administration. They don't change depending on how much product we make. So if we're running at 50% of capacity, our rent for our factory stays the same, our overhead costs for our factory stay the same, and we still have to have a plant manager and a plant payroll, human resources, and so forth. So we have all of the same costs. Those costs stay the same. The variable costs change depending on how much we produce. So depending on if we produce less, we're going to use less raw material, and most likely we'll use less direct labor. So those do vary with volume. They may not be a one-to-one variation, but they do vary with volume. So those are called variable costs. Very, very important to know the difference between a total cost, a fixed cost, and a variable cost, because they all react differently at different levels of volume. So total cost divided by the number of units produced equals average cost. So we can say our widget costs $10 to produce. Well, it costs $10 to produce at some level of volume. If we produce more, the fixed costs stay the same, the variable costs go up, but the average cost will go down because the fixed costs are spread over a larger number of units. And conversely, if volumes fall, the average cost will go up because the fixed costs have to be spread over a fewer number of units. So that means that we have kind of a moving target for costs if we're producing things. Now, if we're buying things from the outside, like a wholesaler, costs are a little bit easier to predict because we are just buying and then reselling. We're not changing the product, so it's a little easier to predict. But manufacturers have this kind of moving target of costs, and figuring out your cost depends on what you expect to produce. So figuring out how much demand there is at different levels of prices may be necessary in order to come up with a pricing strategy. So and one thing that you're going to need in the case that you're working on, and you need in many, many pricing decisions, is a break even. So where do we break even? How much do we have to sell at a given price in order to cover our fixed costs is really what break even is. And we can add profit into our fixed costs, and then so how much do we not need to break even, but how many units do we need to sell at a given price in order to meet our profit objective would be another way of looking at it. But we're going to look at it as break even. So how much do we have to produce to cover our fixed costs? The formula is pretty simple. It's your fixed cost, whatever that is, divided by the price that you're going to sell it at minus your variable cost, and that's called contribution margin. So fixed costs divided by contribution margin will give you your break even. So here's an example. If we had in a factory, we had a fixed cost of $40,550. We had a variable cost of production per unit of $45 per unit. And we sold these products for $995 per unit. So the break even, as you can see there, would be $40,550 divided by 995 minus 45, or 40,550 divided by 950, which means we have to produce 43 units in order to break even. So if we can sell 43 units for $995 a piece, we will cover our fixed cost. Any units that we sell above 43 units will generate the contribution margin. They'll generate $950 of profit because our fixed costs will have been covered. So if we sell 50 units, we'll make 7 times 950 as profit. So that's a very important thing to know, because if I'm trying to set price, trying to figure out where I need to be, I have to consider how many I need to sell to break even, and is this a reasonable number? You definitely will see that in the First & Show case. Can we sell enough units at a given price to break even and or make a profit? And I think in that case they actually are looking at some kind of a profitability number that they were looking for. So very, very important formula. Use it in your case study. Use it in the future. It's really, really important to understand. And it's kind of a crossover between some accounting information and some marketing information, but marketers have to look at this stuff. Targeting and positioning strategy also has an effect on price. So who is my target market? We've determined our target market by looking at the markets, looking at demographics, deciding where my product fits. If my target is price sensitive customers, I'm probably going to have to be more price sensitive in my pricing. If my target is less price sensitive customers, let's say affluent customers, they may be willing or likely to tolerate higher price points. So that's the target market. So who are my customers, and what are they going to be willing to pay? How do they value my product? And then positioning. If I'm positioning my product to be a value product, a good value product, I'll probably need a lower price point. If I'm positioning my product to be a status symbol, I can probably support a high price point. So if I'm selling cotton socks in packages of 6, and they're being sold at, Target and Walmart, I probably have to have a low price point on my cotton socks. If I'm selling merino wool socks in more specialized retailers, I can probably have a higher price point because it's more of a luxury good, and I can tolerate a higher price point. So you got to figure out what you're trying to achieve because your pricing is an important part of your marketing strategy. The other thing pricing can help with is getting through the product life cycle. We've talked about product life cycle before: introduction, growth, maturity, decline. Generally, at the introduction level, we usually make a decision between skim pricing and penetration pricing, and I'll talk about those in a second. Once we get to the growth phase, we may use price to stimulate demand and move towards the break-even point, capture market share. When we get to maturity, pricing might be used to defend from other people entering the market, or it might be used to expand profitability because we are a dominant player and we have a mature product. So we're not going to grow it much more, but maybe we can get some of that cash cow money. We can earn more money by driving prices up a little bit. And then decline, pricing can be used in sort of opposite ways. One, to clear out old products to stimulate demand, we can drop price, or we can keep price high to get additional profitability as the product nears the end of its life. So skim pricing. Skim pricing is something that happens usually at the early stages, occasionally at the late stages of the product life cycle. And it can work if there's considerable differentiation between your product and the product existing on the market. You have customers who are quality sensitive. You have an advantage in the marketplace that's sustainable for some period of time, not too many competitors, not too many substitutes, and difficult to enter. So skim pricing is a strategy that, for instance, Apple used with the Apple phone. When they introduced the Apple phone, it was dramatically more expensive than competitors, but they had lots of differentiation. They had a high quality product and their customers appreciated the quality. The advantage was sustainable for some period of time. They didn't have very many competitors in smartphones at the time. They were basically competing with BlackBerry when they introduced the Apple phone. So they had one competitor, and they had a considerable differentiation from that competitor. There weren't many substitutes, and it was difficult for new competitors to enter. So they used skim pricing on the Apple iPhone. Same company used the penetration pricing when they introduced the iPad. They priced it low enough that other companies couldn't produce the product at the price that Apple was selling for. So I think the first iPad came out at $599, I believe. No other companies could come close to producing a pad product for $599. Other people could produce similar products at around $1,000, but Apple chose to gain market share, penetrate the market and gain high market share with a penetration pricing strategy. And they dominate the pad market. They got, 70, 80% of the pad market by doing so. So their product wasn't revolutionary. It was fairly easy to copy, but nobody could copy it at the price that they came in at. So there's a company that's used both skim and penetration pricing uh, for two somewhat similar products, but their phone was unique, and they weren't looking to own the whole market. They were looking to own the upper end market. And they've been very successful there, and as time has gone on, they've lowered prices on older models to try to move into some of the more price sensitive markets, but their new models are still the most expensive products on the market. Then there are special situations you may have to deal with for pricing. If we're just trying to survive till the markets improve or whatever, we may need to lower our price just to cover costs. We may just try to break even, not try to make a profit, just break even, cover our costs so we can survive. If we're in true financial distress, we may need to raise funds fast, so we might need to liquidate our products and raise money quickly by lowering price dramatically. So you see companies, retailers would be the ones you'd see the most, who lower prices because they're in financial distress and they're trying to raise cash fast. And then of course when the financial distress becomes bankruptcy, you see going out of business sales where prices are reduced even more to raise cash. And then some companies are looking for growth at the expense of profit. So they set prices to return very little profit in the short run in order to gain market share. Amazon is a good example of that. They've been doing that for a long time. They are all about growing, not necessarily about making money in the short term. So they are very, very hyper competitive on price. And then finally, companies sometimes use loss leaders. They may lose money on a particular product in order to drive traffic and or business to their store, to their product line, whatever. So they may use loss leaders. Grocery stores often use loss leaders on things like milk. So pricing of milk is really low so that people will come for their milk and hopefully buy the rest of their groceries in that store. So that's a loss leader strategy. And then ways that we adapt for pricing, we can do lots of different kinds of pricing. So we can offer discounts, we can offer allowances, and I'll go through what these things are. We can bundle products together, or we can unbundle products. So those of you who have cable services, you're buying a bundle. You're buying the cable service for your internet, you're buying the cable service for TV, and maybe you're buying your phone all bundled together at one price. That's an adaptation, and it may mean that the company that's selling that to you can attract you to their product without discounting as much as they might have to if they were unbundled, or you're just buying the phone service or just buying the internet service. So put them all together and maybe it's an easier sale, and that's an adaptation. I might also change my product by enhancing it in some way. Car companies do this all the time. So you've got the base model, and then you've got the fancier model and the very fanciest model with lots of gewgaws and stuff in the product, and that's a way to have a price that appeals to a variety of different target markets. And then finally, we might price different in different segments. So we talked about selling textbooks in foreign countries and selling them in the US. That was segment pricing. We also might price, airlines are very good at pricing, segment pricing, tuition, so that, tuition, airfares, so that business people end up paying more than casual travelers. So if you really have to be somewhere at a certain time, you're probably going to pay more than someone who has a more flexible schedule, a vacationer. So that's a segment pricing strategy. And this chart here, I won't go through the whole thing, but this shows you the kinds of things you might come under discounts, allowances, bundling, product enhancement, segment pricing. So if people buy in volume, they may get a quantity discount. If they buy my product when it's not in season, they may get some kind of a discount. So that kind of thing. So that wraps up chapter 7. Answer the questions following this, and next week we'll go on to chapter 8. Thank you.